The morning Marcus chose not to walk past was the same morning that changed everything. It was a Tuesday in January, the kind that arrives without apology, with a wind that cuts through the gap between your collar and your ears and reminds you that cold does not care who you are or how old you are or whether your mother already left for work before the sun came up. The school bus stop on Clement Street sat at the corner where the dollar store and the laundromat faced each other across cracked pavement, and Marcus Ellison, 12 years old, stood there with his backpack and his lunch, and the navy blue coat his grandmother had given him 2 Christmases ago. The coat was the best thing he owned. Quilted, lined, heavy enough to keep you warm on a walk from the bus stop to the school door, even when the wind came off the river. He knew what it cost because he had heard his grandmother say so on the phone. He had not been meant to hear, but he had. $68 at the store on 5th, and she had layered it into a box with tissue paper and told him to take care of it. He took care of it. The truth was that Marcus knew the weight of that coat in a way he could not have explained to anyone who had never gone without one. He knew what it felt like to stand at a bus stop in December with only a hoodie and try not to look cold because looking cold felt like asking for something, and Marcus had been raised not to ask. He knew how the other kids' eyes moved over you differently in January when your sleeves were too thin. The coat was $68 of protection against all of that, and he wore it with the particular care of a person who understands they are wearing something that costs someone they love more than they should have spent. On that Tuesday, though, Marcus looked up from the crack in the pavement he had been studying and saw the man. The man was maybe 65, thin in the way that older men get thin when the cold has been working on them all season, with a silver-flecked beard that the wind was pressing sideways. He was walking a dog, a small beige mutt with wiry fur, on a fraying leash. The dog seemed fine. The man did not. He had on a grey button-down shirt, the kind you wear on a mild day in October, and dark slacks and nothing else. No coat, no scarf, no gloves. He was moving slowly down the sidewalk and his shoulders were drawn up toward his ears, the way a person's shoulders go when their body has given up trying to warm itself from the outside and is just trying to hold what little warmth is left. Marcus watched him for a moment. The bus was not due for 4 minutes, he had checked. He did not think about it very long. He had been raised by his mother, Diane, in a 2-bedroom apartment 3 blocks away, and the one thing Diane Ellison said more than anything else was that you pass what you have along when someone needs it more. She'd said it when she gave the last of the canned soup to the neighbour upstairs during the ice storm 2 winters ago. She had said it when she bundled up Marcus's old clothes and dropped them at the church on Broad. She had said it so many times that it had stopped being something Marcus heard and started being something Marcus was. He crossed the sidewalk and stopped in front of the man. "Sir," he said, "you look cold." The man looked down at him. His eyes were dark and careful, and they took Marcus in with a kind of stillness that felt different from how most adults looked at kids on the street. He wasn't dismissive. He wasn't amused. He was just looking. "I walked out without thinking," the man said. His voice was low, a little rough from the cold. "I do this walk every morning, and I knew it was supposed to freeze, and I still walked out without thinking." The dog sat down on the pavement between them and looked up at both of them as if waiting for a resolution. "Here," Marcus said, and he pulled off the navy blue coat and held it out. The man looked at the coat. He looked at Marcus. He looked at the coat again. "Son," he said, "I can't take your coat." "I have a hoodie on," Marcus said. He did. A grey pullover with the hood drawstring missing. It was not $68. It was going to be a cold 4 minutes and a cold walk from the bus door to the school entrance. But 4 minutes was not forever. "You need it more than I do right now." The man stood very still for a moment. The wind picked up and the dog tucked its nose under its front paw. "What's your name?" the man asked. "Marcus." "Marcus!" He said it the way teachers say a name when they want to make sure they have it exactly right. "I'll get this back to you." "You don't have to," Marcus said. The man took the coat. He put it on, and it was a little big across the shoulders for him, but he pulled it closed and something in his posture changed. He stood a little less hunched. He looked down at Marcus with those careful eyes. "Thank you," he said, and the way he said it, Marcus felt it was the truest version of those 2 words he had ever heard. The bus came 30 seconds later. Marcus got on with his arms crossed over his chest and his hoodie doing what it could, which was not much. He found a seat in the middle where the heat from the vents was strongest, and he pressed his back against the seat and watched the man through the glass as the bus pulled away. The man was still standing on the corner, the dog sitting at his feet, watching the bus go. He had one hand raised in a small, unhurried wave. Marcus did not know who the man was. He had no way of knowing that the man had driven from a hotel 12 miles away to walk that particular stretch of Clement Street on that particular morning, because he always liked to walk the neighbourhood he was about to work in before he started, to see it at ground level before he saw it on paper. He had no way of knowing that this was the man who would be standing in the front hallway of Westfield Elementary School the next Monday morning to introduce himself as the new principal, Dr. Harold Webb. He had no way of knowing any of that. All he knew was that the man had needed the coat more than he did that morning, and so the man had the coat. That was enough. The cold days kept coming, the way they do in January, one after another, uninterested in compromise. Marcus wore his hoodie on the days it wasn't raining, and his mother's spare rain slicker on the days it was, which kept him dry but not warm, and Diane noticed and asked where the coat had gotten to. He told her the truth. She went quiet for a moment, and then she said what she always said. "You did right," she said. "We'll figure out the coat." She did not say it easily. The coat was not a thing they could replace without planning. Diane worked the early shift at the hospital laundry, 5 in the morning until 1:30 in the afternoon, and then 2 evenings a week she cleaned offices in the building on Harbour Street. That was their money. The rent, the food, the bus passes, Marcus's school supplies, and the 2 prescriptions she kept in the cabinet above the sink. There was not a lot of planning room for a $68 coat in January when the heating bill was already up. She said it with conviction. And Marcus believed her, and that was how they handled most things. He got through the rest of January in layers. A thermal undershirt, the hoodie, a windbreaker he found in the back of the hall closet that had belonged to his uncle and was too big but blocked the wind. He was not dramatically cold. He managed. But he was aware every morning at the bus stop that he had given away the best thing he owned, and he was aware that he would do it again if he had to, and he was aware that these 2 things were both true at the same time, and that was just how life was. He had not told anyone at school about the coat. It felt private in a way he couldn't entirely explain. Not a secret, just his own. Some mornings the windbreaker was enough. Some mornings it was not. On the mornings it was not, Marcus did what he always did, which was put his attention somewhere else. The work, the day, the specific sentence in the specific paragraph on the page in front of him. Mr. Okafor ran the kind of classroom where attention had a place to go, where a question asked in good faith got answered with the same, and Marcus had been a good student in the unrecognised way that certain children are good students before anyone formally records it. He did the work, he asked when he did not understand. He helped the kid next to him, Devon, when Devon got stuck on the long division problems because Devon had a way of stalling at the page that Marcus recognised as embarrassment, and Marcus did not believe embarrassment was a reason to let someone struggle. He just did not mention the coat. That part was his. The following Monday arrived with grey skies and the smell of snow that hadn't fallen yet. Marcus walked into Westfield Elementary with the other kids flooding in from the buses, shoulders tucked against the cold, backpacks swinging. He was almost to the hallway that led toward his classroom when he heard the voice. "Would you look at that?" He turned. Standing just inside the front entrance beside Mrs. Flowers at the front desk was the man from the bus stop. Harold had walked the hallway twice already that morning. He had been at the school since 6:45, which was earlier than his stated time and later than he would have liked. He had the habit of arriving in the empty building and standing in the front entrance for a few minutes before any students arrived, just to feel the weight of the place on a quiet morning. The way the light came through the glass doors and hit the linoleum, the smell of floor cleaner and old paper, and the particular institutional quiet that schools have when they're empty. He believed you could read a school in that quiet, the shape of it, what it had been through. He had stood in the Westfield entrance that morning and understood it to be a building that was tired in a specific way, the way a person gets tired not from one hard day but from a long stretch of uncertainty. He intended to fix that. He was wearing a charcoal blazer and dark slacks and a press-ironed shirt, and his silver-flecked beard was neatly trimmed. He was taller indoors than Marcus had registered outdoors. He stood with the kind of natural steadiness that meant people looked at him when he entered a room. And he was wearing the navy blue coat, folded over his left arm. Their eyes met across the hallway, and the man's face did something Marcus had not seen a grown adult's face do in a long time. It broke open, not dramatically, not with noise, just a quiet, private breaking open, the kind that means something real happened behind it. "Marcus," the man said. Mrs. Flowers looked from the man to the boy and back again, with the particular confusion of someone who has missed the beginning of a story. "You two know each other," she said. "We do," the man said. He stepped forward and held the coat out to Marcus the way Marcus had held it out to him on the corner a week ago. "My name is Harold Webb. I'm your new principal, and this coat belongs to you." Marcus took it. It was still warm from being folded, or maybe he imagined that. He looked at the man and felt the same thing he had felt on the corner, that the eyes looking at him were the careful, honest kind that did not miss much. "You didn't have to come back with it," Marcus said. "I said I would." That was all. The bell rang and the hallway filled with noise, and Mrs. Flowers started directing kids to their homerooms, and Harold stood back against the wall and watched the school fill up the way a person watches something they are deciding they love. If you can hold a moment in your mind, the kind that doesn't make sense in terms of scale, a boy handing a coat to a stranger on a cold corner, a stranger who turns out to be the one person in the building with the authority to change things, that is the moment to hold. Marcus did not know he had given the coat to the person who would become the most important adult in his school year. He had not given it because of that. He had given it because a man was cold and he had a coat, and his mother had raised him to pass what he had along. The world sometimes is paying closer attention than it lets on. Harold had taken the job at Westfield Elementary after 15 years as a principal in the district south of the river, and he had not taken it lightly. Westfield had been through 2 principals in 3 years, a stretch of administrative turnover that left teachers exhausted and kids unsteady. And the superintendent had asked Harold specifically because Harold was known for the thing that is hardest to teach, the ability to see a school clearly from the inside, the way the children actually experienced it, not the way the paperwork described it. Harold had a reputation for walking hallways before his staff arrived, eating lunch in the cafeteria instead of his office, standing at the bus loop in the morning cold because that was where you saw which kids came in nervous and which came in steady and which came in carrying something heavy. He had been doing that walk for 2 weeks before the coat, walking Clement Street at 6:30 in the morning with his dog Chester, letting the neighbourhood get into him before the school did. He was not a man who made decisions without evidence, and the evidence he trusted most was what he saw with his own eyes. What he had seen on that particular Tuesday was a 12-year-old boy take off his own coat in the January wind and hand it to a stranger without hesitation or ceremony. No performance, no looking around to see if anyone was watching. Just the coat and the matter-of-fact statement that the man needed it more. Harold had stood on that corner for a long moment after the bus pulled away, the coat around his shoulders and the wind still coming off the river, and he had thought about that. "That is the kind of kid I have in this building," he said to himself. He wanted to know everything about that kid. Not because the act was unusual in an abstract sense. Harold had been in education long enough to know that children contained enormous capacity for goodness and that the world spent a considerable amount of energy not noticing. But this had been a particular child, in particular cold, giving up a particular thing that was clearly not easy to give up. Harold had registered the quality of that coat. He had registered the hoodie underneath. He had registered the way Marcus said, "You don't have to," when Harold said he'd return it, because the kid was not giving the coat as a transaction. That was the thing that sat with Harold all week. When he walked into Westfield on Monday morning and saw the boy in the navy hoodie crossing the front entrance, he had known immediately. The build, the careful posture, the unhurried way he moved among the other kids. Harold had been watching for him. Marcus was in Mr. Okafor's 6th grade class, which Harold learned from the roster within the first hour of his first week. The class sat on the 2nd floor, second room on the left, and Harold had walked by it twice in the first 3 days without stopping, just long enough to hear the quality of what was happening inside. What he heard was good. Mr. Okafor ran a room where kids talked, where questions didn't get brushed aside, where the noise was productive. But Harold also learned from the intake records that Marcus had been flagged twice in the fall semester for attending without adequate outerwear in cold weather, and that the school had given him a loaner jacket from the lost and found on both occasions. He learned from the nurse's log that Marcus had come in for cold symptoms twice in November, both times sending himself rather than being sent by a teacher. He learned from the lunch records that Marcus ate the school breakfast as well as the school lunch on most days, which told a particular story about what was available at home in the mornings. He learned what the boy's circumstances were. He also learned what the school's response had been: 2 loaner jackets from the lost and found, a note in a file, and a moved on from. Harold sat with that for a while. He had been in schools long enough to understand that the moved on from was not cruelty. It was capacity. Teachers were moving on from 30 things a day because they had to, because nobody had given them the support to not move on, because the system was not built to hold every thread. He did not blame the teachers. He blamed the gap between what the system required and what the children needed. And he had spent 15 years trying to close that gap one building at a time, in the only way it could be closed, which was from inside, by the person standing in the front of it. He thought about the boy in the navy hoodie giving his coat to a stranger in a January wind and saying simply that the stranger needed it more. He thought about what that boy must have understood at 12 years old, about what it meant to need something more than someone else did. He thought about the records in front of him and the loaner jackets and the note in the file. Harold had a different idea. He started small, the way Harold always started. He made it a point to be in the hallway when the 6th graders transitioned between classes. Not to intercept Marcus, just to be there and to nod. A nod is a small thing. It costs nothing. But when an adult in a position of authority makes a habit of seeing a child, the child eventually understands that they have been seen. That understanding changes something in the architecture of a school day. Marcus noticed. He noticed the way kids notice things that adults think they are being subtle about, which is immediately. He started looking up when he turned the corner on the 2nd floor. Dr. Webb was there maybe half the time, talking to another teacher or reading something on a clipboard, and when Marcus passed, Webb would look up and nod, and Marcus would nod back, and neither of them made more of it than that. It was enough. Somewhere in the 3rd week of February, Harold called Mr. Okafor into his office after school to talk about the 6th grade, and the conversation went where it was meant to go. "I want to ask you about Marcus," Harold said. Mr. Okafor, a young teacher 3 years into his career, had the look of someone who was waiting to be told something had gone wrong. "He's one of my best kids," he said, with a slight edge of protectiveness in his voice. "Quiet, but he's doing the work." "I know he is," Harold said. "I've looked at his scores. He's behind in reading assessment by about a grade level, but his analytical writing is strong and his math is above level. That's not a kid who isn't learning. That's a kid who hasn't had enough access." Mr. Okafor relaxed by about half. "He's been to the library a few times after school, but he has to leave by 4 to get home," he said. "His mother works evenings some days, and he's got himself to manage." Harold nodded slowly. He had already known that part. The school's records were incomplete in the way that most school records were incomplete, full of pieces that nobody had assembled into a picture. Harold was assembling the picture. "I want him in the reading support program," Harold said. "The Tuesday-Thursday one, we run it till 3:30 and I want to make sure transportation is not a barrier. Can you talk to him about it?" "I can," Mr. Okafor said. "He's proud. I want to make sure it's offered the right way." "It will be," Harold said, and he meant it with more specificity than Mr. Okafor understood at the time. If you have ever watched a child receive an opportunity that is offered without condescension, you know what it looks like. It looks like a momentary stillness, the processing of something that came in the right way, and then a quiet yes. Marcus said yes. He started Tuesday and Thursday reading support in the 3rd week of February, and the woman who ran it, Ms. Terence, had a method of teaching that met kids where they were without signalling that she knew where they were, which is the only method that actually works with a kid who has any pride in him. She ran the sessions in a small room on the 1st floor with 4 kids at a time, and the work she did was specific and unhurried, building from where each kid actually was rather than where the curriculum said they should be. She had a way of presenting a difficult passage that made it feel less like a test of your ability and more like a puzzle the two of you were working out together, and Marcus responded to that the way he responded to most things that were offered honestly, with his full attention. The reading was harder for him than the math, and he knew it, and Ms. Terence knew it, and neither of them made a production of knowing it. They just worked. Tuesday and Thursday, 4 o'clock in a small room on the 1st floor, and Marcus did not miss a single session in the first 6 weeks. He came in cold from the bus, hung his windbreaker on the hook by the door, and sat down and worked. Within 3 weeks his reading assessment moved up 8 months. He did not know that Dr. Webb had checked the roster every Wednesday to see that his name was there. March came in cold and wet and then suddenly warm, the way March does when it decides to change its mind overnight. And the school year shifted into that stretch where the finish line is visible from where you're standing, but still far enough away that every day has to count on its own terms. Marcus was doing better in reading. He was doing better in general in the way kids do better when they have been seen and correctly supported. There is a board at Westfield Elementary on the first floor landing, halfway between the entrance and the gymnasium, where the principal puts up photographs of students for different reasons: academic achievement, kindness, community contribution. It has been there since the school was built, repainted twice, and most kids walk past it without looking. Harold changed that in March. He started using the board differently. He wrote the name of the kid and the specific thing the kid had done, not achievement award or citizenship certificate, but the actual thing. Marcus Ellison helped a classmate organize his binder when no one asked him to, and they got it done in 8 minutes. He wrote that and put up a photograph of Marcus from the class photo, and he put it at eye level where 6th graders walked past. Marcus saw it on a Friday afternoon. He stopped. He stood in front of it for a long moment. Then he looked down the hall toward the principal's office, and Harold was standing in his doorway, not looking at Marcus, looking at a paper in his hand, but standing there. Marcus went back to class, but he walked differently for the rest of that afternoon. His teacher noticed. She wrote it in her notes for the week. Marcus seemed lighter today. Something shifted. Harold did not mention the board to Marcus. He did not need to. He had already learned that this was a boy who understood when something had been done deliberately, and who responded to that understanding with more of himself, not with noise. April arrived, and with it, the district's annual recognition ceremony, where students from every school were honoured for different things, and Harold submitted Marcus's name for the Community Character Award. He did not tell Marcus in advance. He submitted the name, wrote the citation himself, and then moved on to the next week's work. The afternoon the letter came home, Diane Ellison sat down at the kitchen table and read it twice. She had gotten home from her early shift at 1:30 and was heating up the leftover rice from the night before and making a mental list of what needed to happen before Marcus got in from school, laundry, the phone call to the dentist she had been putting off for 2 weeks, the bill for the heating that she needed to call about and ask for an extension. Her life was organised in lists that never quite emptied. She had learned to carry them without letting them show. The letter was in the school folder Marcus brought home every Friday, and she had opened the folder on her way back from the mailbox and seen the envelope with the district seal and gone still for a moment at the way you go still when your first thought is that something has gone wrong. Parents of children in under-resourced schools develop that reflex. Official envelopes do not usually mean good news. She sat down at the kitchen table and read it twice. The letter was from the district superintendent's office, and it was addressed to both Diane and Marcus, and it said that Marcus had been nominated by his principal for the Community Character Award, recognizing students who demonstrated sustained kindness and integrity in their school and neighborhood communities, and that Marcus would be honored at the district ceremony on April 29th. Diane put the letter on the table and went to the doorway of Marcus's bedroom. "Baby," she said, "come here." Marcus came out with his reading book still open in his hand. She held up the letter. He read it again. He looked at his mother. "Dr. Webb did this," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," she said. He sat down on the couch and was quiet for a moment, and Diane watched him in the way she had watched him his whole life, with the specific attention of a woman who raised her son alone and understood that the things that happened in the quiet were the ones that formed him. "The coat," he said finally. "Tell me about the coat," she said, because she had always known there was more to the story than he had said that first morning. He told her. All of it. The man on the corner, the dog, the careful eyes, the way the man had said, "Thank you," like he meant the truest version of it. The way the man had walked into school that first Monday with the coat folded over his arm. She listened without interrupting. When he was done, she was quiet for a moment. "You gave your coat to your own principal," she said. "I didn't know," Marcus said. "No," she said. "That's the point. You didn't know." She went back to the kitchen and got herself a glass of water and stood at the sink for a moment with her hand on the counter. She was thinking about the coat, the $68 coat, and what it had come back as. She had raised her son to give without expecting return, and here was what return looked like when you didn't expect it. It looked like a letter from the superintendent's office. It looked like a reading program that had moved her son up 8 months in 6 weeks. It looked like a photograph on a board at eye level on the first floor landing. She thought about all the things she had given quietly over the years: the soup, the clothes, the extra hours of work so Marcus could have what he needed, and how rarely any of it came back, and how much of the time she had given it anyway, because Diane had been raised the same way she was raising her son, by a woman who believed that you pass what you have along, and you trust the world to remember even when the world seems not to be paying attention. The world, it turned out, had been paying attention. The district ceremony was on April 29th, a Tuesday, in the auditorium of the district's high school. Diane got off her early shift at the hospital laundry at 1:30 and went home and changed into the dark blue dress she kept for occasions that required more than what she wore to work. She pressed the dress carefully, the way her mother had taught her to press things, and she got to the auditorium by 5:15, which was 45 minutes early, and she sat in the third row. She looked at the program they handed her at the door. She found Marcus's name on the second page and read it twice. His name and Westfield Elementary and Community Character Award. She folded the program along its original crease and held it in her hands. Marcus came in with Mr. Okafor and a handful of other sixth graders who were also being recognised, and when he saw his mother in the third row, he walked straight to her and she stood up and held his face in both her hands for a moment before she let him go sit with his class. He smelled like the lavender soap she kept by the bathroom sink, and he was wearing the grey sweater she had pressed that morning, and she watched him take his seat in the row reserved for honorees and thought that he looked exactly like himself, which was the best thing she knew how to think about him. Harold sat in the front row with the other principals. He had on a grey suit and his silver-flecked beard was neat, and there was nothing in his posture that suggested this evening was anything other than professional business. But he caught Marcus's eye as the boy walked past and gave him the same small nod he had been giving him in the second-floor hallway since February. Marcus nodded back. When Marcus's name was called, he walked to the podium in the grey sweater Diane had pressed for the occasion, and the superintendent read the citation, and the citation described a boy who had demonstrated, and the superintendent's exact word was integrity, the kind that does not perform for an audience, and Marcus stood with his hands at his sides and received it with the same composure that had been there on the corner in January, when he handed a stranger his coat and said simply that the man needed it more. The auditorium was not small. There were maybe 400 people in it. When Marcus's name was called, the applause was warm and real, and Harold clapped in a particular way, both hands brought together fully, not polite but meant. After the ceremony, in the corridor where the families gathered, Harold found Diane first. He introduced himself the way he always introduced himself, with his full name and his role, no performance around it. "Your son is someone worth knowing," Harold said. Diane looked at him steadily. "I know he is," she said. "I've known it a long time." Harold smiled. It was not the smile of a man who expected to be the first one to know something about a kid, because he never expected that. The people who got there first were always the mothers. "He gave me his coat," Harold said. "I know," Diane said. "He told me." "He said you don't have to when I told him I'd return it," Harold said. "I want you to know I did think about that. He meant it. He wasn't waiting for it back." Diane was quiet for a moment. "That's how I raised him," she said. "I know," Harold said. "It shows." Marcus came over with his certificate in one hand and found his mother standing with a man in a grey suit, and he looked between them with the expression of a 12-year-old who understands more than he is supposed to. "Dr. Webb," he said. "Marcus," Harold said, "your mother was telling me things I already knew." Marcus looked at his mother. She raised her eyebrows very slightly, which in their language meant he should behave, and also, "Isn't this something?" He put the certificate under his arm and stood up straighter. There is something that happens when a child is seen correctly and supported correctly over a period of months, something that does not have a precise name but that every good teacher recognizes. It is not the same as happiness, though it includes that. It is more like solidity, the sense that the ground under them is real and will hold. Marcus had it that evening in the corridor of the district high school. He had it in the way he held his certificate, and in the way he stood next to his mother, and in the way he looked at the man who had given back more than a coat. Harold stayed at Westfield Elementary. He stayed for 7 years, and in those 7 years, the school went through a change that the district talked about as a case study for how leadership at the building level can shift outcomes for an entire community. Test scores improved. Attendance rates improved. The number of students enrolled in after-school programming doubled and then tripled. 2 teachers who had been burning out stayed and eventually became leaders in their own right. The hallway board became a ritual. Every week, a new specific name and a new specific act. Marcus finished 6th grade with reading scores above level and moved on to middle school with the kind of self-assurance that comes from having been seen at a moment when it would have been easy not to be. The coat he gave that morning was a $68 coat that his grandmother had layered in tissue paper and told him to take care of. He had taken care of it, and then he had done something better than taking care of it. He had given it to someone who was cold. He never stopped doing that. Not because of what it brought back to him, though he never forgot what it had brought back. He kept doing it because his mother had raised him that way, and her mother had raised her that way. And somewhere in the long line of women and men who had passed things along without expecting return, there was a faith that the world was keeping count, even when it seemed not to be. It was. Has a small act of kindness ever come back to you in a way you didn't expect? Leave it in the comments. There are people in this world doing things every day that no one notices, and it matters. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you want another story just like this one, there's one waiting for you right after this. The certificate hung on the wall in Marcus and Diane's apartment for the rest of the year, and then it moved when they moved, and it was in the same place in every apartment they lived in after that. Not in the centre of the wall, not in the most prominent place, just on the wall. Present. On the morning of Marcus's first day of middle school in September, Diane handed him a shopping bag before he left. Inside was a coat, dark green, quilted, lined, heavy enough for the river wind. He looked at it, and then at her. "New year," she said. "New coat." He put it on. It fit. He walked to the bus stop on Clement Street in the early morning, and the light was low and gold the way September light is before it decides to be hot or cold. And he stood at the corner where he had stood in January and looked both ways out of habit. The corner was empty. No man, no dog, no stranger in a thin shirt needing something he had. Just the dollar store and the laundromat facing each other across the cracked pavement, and the river wind, and the quiet, ordinary morning that was its own kind of gift. He got on the bus, and the bus went toward the rest of his life, and the dark green coat stayed on his shoulders all the way there, warm the whole ride. Kindness does not disappear when you pass it on. It simply changes hands and goes further than you thought and comes back around when the cold hits again.